And I'm thinking to myself, good God, I want to be anywhere but right here. I just want to run. I want to get up. I want to take a walk outside, but I literally couldn't move. I couldn't go anywhere. And I'm so uncomfortable, and I'm feeling how uncomfortable I am. And then all of a sudden, this voice comes into my head and it says, there's nowhere to go until you surrender to where you're at. And I just took a deep breath and I just let everything go and completely relaxed into the whole thing. And it transformed from this really uncomfortable feeling into this fucking magical ride of being in the magnificence of myself.
All right, we're blasting off. So thank you, Eben, for taking the time to hop on the podcast today. I really do appreciate it, first off.
Absolutely, brother. I'm happy to be here.
How was the hot yoga session, by the way? I meant to ask you because it's actually been a while since I've been to any class sessions. I'm in Brooklyn, New York, so everything's pretty much locked down tight. I imagine it's similar in LA. I've done a few one-on-one classes, Muay Thai, a bunch of Muay Thai actually, but I haven't been back to a group class yet. What was that like going back to hot yoga for you?
It was amazing, man. I mean, I loved it. I missed the hot yoga. It's super challenging to be in that hot room and to do the Bikram style, the 26 and 2. I don't know if we can call it Bikram anymore, but since he's been sort of exiled.
The documentary, yeah.
And also, what I thought was most interesting in that documentary was that he really just took that sequence from his guru and Americanized it and was just a brilliant salesman. It was basically what happened. And then he slapped his name on it. So, but as far as I can tell, everybody calls it 26 and 2 or just hot yoga now. And it's excellent, dude. It's one of my favorite things. It was one of the things I've been missing more than anything here. I mean, gyms have been closed. I always love lifting weights. But the hot yoga, I can get some weights in the garage, but I can't really do hot yoga anywhere.
Yeah.
But in that classroom. So
exactly.
It was excellent, dude. I felt good. I took a few micro doses before, and it was excellent.
Yeah, hot yoga was my introduction into different types of strengths, which I'm sure we'll get into. You obviously played in the NFL for over half a decade. You're very familiar with training for strength and lifting heavy weights. I had a smaller dose of that in college baseball, and I went to a few hot yoga classes when I was there, and that was kind of when I realized, there's different types of people that are strong. Sure, I might be able to squat this much weight or deadlift this much weight, but this woman can get herself in a position and stay there for 13 minutes, and just breathe talking normally to me. Or this instructor is having a conversation in a class going into the most advanced pose of a segment where I'm in the beginner pose panting, and I'm like, how is she talking normally right now? So yeah, it kind of blew my mind the first time I did it. It's been a while.
Absolutely, dude. It'll totally humble you. It'll completely humble you. Today, I was pretty proud of myself. First class back in probably 6 months, I guess. And I did really well. I was expecting to be dying. But, I do a lot of breath work. Breath work has been my savior through the last year. Breath work, meditation. And then my physical routine has really transformed. I mean, I was a guy for a long time. I'd go to the gym for 2 hours and pump iron and just get after it, because I really enjoyed that. But with COVID and gym shutting down, and my whole routine has evolved, and I get super efficient workouts in that are much quicker. So, I'm doing my podcast, I'm writing my book, I'm doing a handful of other things in the meantime, running my social media shit, because of course that's the That's the channel where everybody finds everything these days, and that's cool. But I'm doing everything myself, so I'll get in, 100 kettlebell swings in between writing emails, or just hit 100 push-ups, just to keep my body moving. And it's been incredible for me, and I feel like I'm in the best shape of my life, to be honest with you, man.
So you feel like you're in a better shape. You feel like you're in better shape now than when you were playing in the NFL.
Oh, no question. No question. I was really broken down. I got into the NFL maybe in the best athletic shape of my life. Strongest, fastest, quickest. But by the time I left, I was really broken down. I was exhausted. I was overweight. I was depressed, angry, unfulfilled, and in a lot of pain. And coming out of my career, it took me a while. I left the NFL. I've been saying this as I've started writing. I've written the manuscript for my first book, The Eben Flow, Basic Tools to Transform Your Life. And that's really a look at my life coming out of the NFL, being completely physically, emotionally, spiritually destroyed. And the tools I used to heal myself and reconfigure myself in life after football. And that's what this first book is about. But yeah, man, it's been a long road, and I can honestly tell you, I feel like I'm in the best shape of my life today, right now.
Yeah, I'm going to get into that road, and I thought it could be good to start with an entrance into where you might be now, as opposed to maybe back in the day when you were still playing. And speaking of the tools and using tools to control pain or harness pain, I was listening to you, I believe it was on Mike's podcast, formerly known as Mike Stubb. You never know. A huge fan of that podcast. And you talked a little bit about an accidental mushroom experience that you had last year back in June. And I saw a little clip of it on Twitter, and I wanted to see if you may be able to retell that story, and also how you look back on it now that you've had a little bit more distance between it. Because you said something that really stuck with me. You said, there's nothing to surrender until you surrender to where you're at. I hope I'm getting that correctly. So
almost.
What was it? I may have written it down wrong.
There's nowhere to go until you surrender to where you're at.
No, there's nowhere to go until you surrender to where you're at. So how do you? First, what happened in that situation, and how do you look back on it now that you have some distance between it? Because I was listening to it and I was like, damn, I really want to get into this.
I love that, dude. So it was a summer day here in LA. COVID's in full flux. In LA, California has been a complete disaster, very much thanks to our governor, who's, in my hope, hopefully soon to be recalled, and we'll have a new governor in place by the end of the month here. But California's been a bit of a disaster. It's been open, it's been closed, but small businesses have been just about completely destroyed. There hasn't been a whole lot to do, a whole lot of options as far as getting out. They've closed hikes, they've closed beaches, they've opened them up, they've closed them back. It's just been crazy. So throughout the process of COVID, I was really starting to get antsy, and that has my spirit has kind of opened up to this place where I'm just like, fuck it, I'm going and taking trips now. I'm going out to Arizona, I'm going to Montana, I'm setting myself free, going on these adventures, bringing my family on some of them when they can. But so during that time, we're in the full flux of COVID lockdowns, and I'm a big fan of psychedelics. I'm a big fan of psilocybin. It's been very therapeutic for me throughout especially in the last 4 or 5 years, in really getting to the seeds of my functioning mechanism and who I am as a being on this planet in this lifetime. So this summer, I had just gotten a new batch of mushrooms. I hadn't tried them yet. For anyone who's not familiar or familiar with mushrooms, there's all different kinds of strains, just like cannabis. And there's big ones, and there's little ones, and there's all shapes and sizes. There's ones that look like your finger. There's ones that are like perfect little mushrooms. I usually there are these ones that I'd gotten for a while that were called albinos, white albinos, and they're these really nice looking, beautiful little mushrooms. And they've always been very effective for me. Now in this batch, these were some monsters. These were some big dogs. The smallest ones looked like my pinky or my thumb.
Yeah, it looks like me standing next to you.
Yeah, exactly. In my experience, the bigger the mushroom, the less potent they are. I don't know why that is, and maybe I could be wrong in that, but that is just that's been the experience that I've had. So I got this batch, and I say that because I like to pop like a cap and a stem, or a couple stems and a couple caps. I like to really titrate my dose of mushrooms. If I'm not going to do a big trip, I'd like to just take a little bit at a time, and that just opens me up and puts me in the flow and gets me where I need to go. But so I had this new batch. And another thing I'll throw in here, because it's important for why it ended up being an accidental big trip. Every morning I intermittent fast. About five mornings a week. I don't eat breakfast. On this particular day, it was during the week, I felt like I wanted to eat some breakfast, so I had a solid breakfast, had like a scramble with bacon and some like a good keto breakfast. So, and I wasn't going to take any mushrooms that day. That was my initial plan. But as the day wore on, now it's about 11 o'clock. I've got a podcast to do at 1. I have to run an errand before the podcast starts. So I go, you know what? I'm going to try these mushrooms. So I take one out, a decent sized one. It didn't appear to me to be too big or too potent. Ate it, ran the errand, came home, was feeling good, but not really feeling anything. I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to eat one more. I'm going to get a workout in. And by the time I'm done with my workout, I'm going to be ready for my podcast, and I'll be ready to roll. And so I eat another mushroom, about the same size, maybe a little bigger. I go and I get my workout in. Finishing up my workout, and I'm starting to feel the mushrooms are really starting to take hold. And I start preparing for this podcast. And as I'm preparing and gathering all of my gear to do this podcast, I realize that I am just in a complete descent into myself. And the mushrooms are really starting to take on.
So you feel like you're almost falling into yourself?
Yes. I'm literally descending down into the deeper dimensions of myself. And I'm looking around my house, and I'm seeing how much stuff there is to do, and the mail that I haven't opened, and then thinking about the emails that I meant to send that I didn't get to send. And it's like I'm just like falling down into myself. And I'm just looking at all this stuff that I'm missing. And I just keep falling, and I keep falling, and I sit down at the table to do this podcast, and I realize there's just no way I'm going to be able to sit there and do this podcast. And I walk over, grab my yoga mat, put it down in the middle of my living room, and I open it up, and I just sprawl out on the floor, and this thing just starts to completely take me over. And I close my eyes, and I'm feeling the medicine just moving all through my body, all through my mind. I'm feeling really uncomfortable. I open my eyes up, and my ceiling is this kaleidoscopic, fractalized universe. And I go, oh my God, Here I am. Here I am, Eb. We're in a real trip now, man. I close my eyes, and I just work on relaxing my body. And as I'm trying to do that, these two entities come into me. One of them is this masculine force, which is like this abstract cobra that's dive bombing me and analyzing me and fucking all over me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really uncomfortable and doing my best to get out of the way of it, but it's just there, and it's checking me out, man. And it's fucking, it's grilling me. And then this feminine essence comes in, which I couldn't see, but I could feel, and it just starts moving its way through my whole being. And it starts finding all this shit that I'm holding on to and that I'm hiding from myself.
Like insecurities, things like that?
Insecurities, shame. It's like, Eb, oh yeah, Eb, you know, this little piece of darkness over here, we're gonna shine some light on that. You know, how you feel, you know, your sexuality and your feelings about who you are and what you are, and you know, this deep lust that you have, and all of these things. We're going to bring them up, man, and we're going to show you who you are right now.
Yeah. Fucking like a whirlwind, I guess looking back on it now, it's beautiful, but at the time you don't realize that you're in the middle of something that could be beautiful if you get through it. So it's like a hell. It's like a hell in its own way while it's happening.
You know, I've done a lot of this stuff now, and it was one of those things where, so I'm in that, and I'm feeling all of that. I'm being dive bombed, and the feminine energy is going into all my dark places and pulling shit out and showing it to me. And I'm thinking to myself, good God, I want to be anywhere but right here. I just want to run. I want to get up. I want to take a walk outside, but I literally couldn't move. I couldn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And I'm so uncomfortable, and I'm feeling how uncomfortable I am. And then all of a sudden, this voice comes into my head, and it says, there's nowhere to go until you surrender to where you're at. And I just took a deep breath, and I just let everything go and completely relaxed into the whole thing. And it transformed from this really uncomfortable feeling trip into this fucking magical ride of being in the magnificence of myself, dancing with these cobras, riding the waves of this golden palace that was my soul. And it was super, it was a very necessary experience. I think I probably ended up having 4 grams of mushrooms.
Yeah,
in that trip.
It's a good amount. A heroic dose that would qualify.
Yeah, just about. And it was, there was so much in it. There was let go of all the bullshit. There's so much unnecessary things we trouble ourselves with. Letting go of all of that. There was, you know, at the end of the day, nothing really matters but loving each other and supporting each other and finding joy in your life. And it was a big lesson in that. And then that voice, that was really the thing, you know, there's nowhere to go until you surrender to where you're at. And that's, to me, that's so profound in my life. That is always, that's a message that pervades throughout, because myself, I know I am heading, I'm taking a wrong turn on the path anytime I'm looking too far into the future, or I'm getting distracted by this thing over here and I want to go do that, and I'm not paying attention to where I am, where my feet are right in this moment. And it was a super profound experience, man. And that's, you know, that's the essence of these medicines, is they really bring you back to the source of yourself and to the source of all things. You know, we get so distracted and spun out into all different kinds of areas because we feel like we're not as successful as we're supposed to be, or we're not exactly where we're supposed to be, or we need to be doing something else, or we need to be somewhere else. And it's like, man, until we fucking surrender right here to where we're at, and we can relate to the world from this point, there's no going anywhere else.
Yeah. Speaking of wanting to be someone else, so when I heard part of that story on the You Never Know podcast, when I saw that clip, the first thought was, wow, that is super profound. That is something that sounds beautiful, dark, twisted. Like, if you getting through that is something that's, it's scary as shit, and it happened. And then my second thought was, damn, I'm jealous of Eben to be able to do that. I wish I could steal his skill set and kind of like be someone else in the art of letting go of that realm, because that's something that I'm still working on. Is I've gotten into meditation. I am paying more attention to observing things that happen within my body and not necessarily letting them color my consciousness. The next thing I feel like I'm being called towards in my journey is to take a full dose of psychedelics. And I've done microdoses. I've had really positive effects from that. And every time I think of taking a full dose of whatever it is, LSD, mushrooms, I'm not well versed in psychedelics at all. I would say I have a very basic general knowledge. I think back to when I had anxiety attacks or panic attacks, or maybe when I was too fucking high because I just did not respect the weed. I guess like, what helps you when you're in that moment where it could all go to shit, and you keep trying to you keep trying to tighten up and like hang on to yourself, and like, I need my reality not to change? Because I can understand that from an anxiety point of view, where it's like you feel, you know, you think your heart's gonna explode or your throat starts closing up, like you're like, oh, am I dying? And like, being able to work through that also on psychedelics is something that scares me. Never experienced it, just to be clear. So I'm speaking as someone who's never fully tripped out, but I do know it's a possibility and will be something that I have to be ready for when that day comes.
Yeah, man, everything you said really resonates with me. And the practice, because you said it right there, you know, we spend a lot of time trying to hold on and control shit. And that anxiety, because I've been there, being way too high on cannabis in particular. Yeah. Terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. But what that message is, because cannabis will take you into the fucking underworld. And it'll really scare the shit out of you. That's happened for me a lot.
Yeah, same. The paranoia, all the bodily effects, psychological effects.
Man. Absolutely. What that message is is that you're not really in control of anything anyway. You know, and for me, it's always comes back to cannabis in particular, because psychedelics operate in a different realm, at least as far as my experience has been. And yes, you can have those really intense, uncomfortable, scary experiences like that, but it's much different than what cannabis will show you. But, you know, man, there's so much happening in your body that you like, to me, the message, it always comes back to life is a miracle. This life is an absolute miracle. And sometimes we have to have the shit scared out of us. Sometimes we have to be brought to the point where we think we're literally going to die in order to live to our highest extent, in our highest greatness. And when cannabis takes you to those places, because to me, it's showing me what a miracle this all is. There are a billion things happening inside of this body right now that I am not in control of that are keeping me alive.
Yeah.
I don't even know what's happening. I'm looking in this screen at this face that's talking. I don't even know, we're having a conversation about something. I don't even know where this stuff is coming from at the end of the day. The deeper you go into it, you know, and we are just very, in the West in particular, we are very identified with this thing that you call Eben, that you call Zach. We're so identified with it that we're just holding on for dear life. Please, don't show me anything that'll tell me I'm being lied to, you know? And really, at the end of the day, you're just lying to yourself, you know? So when that happens, man, and these plants, man, they're deeply intelligent. They come directly from the source of the fucking universe, of the planet. Like, this shit, it's not, you know, this is not just a mushroom. This is not just a cannabis bud. Like, this shit has a deep intelligence to it, and it interacts with our body on a chemical level unlike anything else. And really everything does. We just don't identify it as having an intelligence because it doesn't speak a language. I mean, you could argue that human beings are maybe the dumbest creatures on the planet because we're so wrapped up in our mind.
There's a lot of evidence. There's a lot of evidence of our unintelligence, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we're just so wrapped up in our mind. The jump, whenever we made the jump from living from our heart to living in our mind and the intellect and giving so much power over to our mind and our intellect, we literally cut ourselves off from the most intimate and deep levels of experience of this reality. Because when you live from your heart, like animals do, like everything in nature does, it's all living from the heart. There's no fucking doubt. There's no anxiety. There's no nothing. And so, really, you know, what psychedelics do is they take you out of your mind and put you back into your heart. And, you know, because that's really when we start to get fucked up, you know. And so that practice, call it faith, man. Having faith, let go, throw yourself into the hands of God, you know, when that shit starts to take over.
Yeah, it's like I've experienced it with smoking weed, and it's like you were saying, all these things that happen in the background, your heart beating, your cells expanding and dilating, your breath coming in and out slowly. It's like that, all that happens on autopilot during the day, and I don't think about it. Maybe if I'm anxious that day, something will be at a higher baseline level in my mind. It's like at least for weed, I can attest to the fact that it's like it blows the doors off of whatever that wall is between my bodily sensations and the way that I perceive them. They can no longer sit in the background. So it's like I either need to accept it or go deeper and deeper into that battle of this isn't happening. I need to go back to where I was before because this fucking sucks.
Yeah. And the only thing to do, man, the breath is your gateway. Stay in the breath. Let it go. Stay in the breath. Let it all go.
So the breath really helps you to come back to some sort of place of peace or center. The breath is what you pay attention to during those times when everything's turbulent.
Yes. I've done a couple ayahuasca ceremonies now, and my good friend who brought me into that world, he's done over 100 ayahuasca ceremonies now, and he said it's all about the breath. Everything is about the breath. You just come back to the breath. Shit gets really heavy, come back to the breath. Just keep coming back to the breath and let go, man. I know it's really hard because your mind starts running off on this train of thought, like shit's wrong, shit's fucked up, red alert, sound the alarms, we're fucked, we're gonna die, all of that. And just say, okay, just acknowledge it. For me, what has been one of the most powerful things is acknowledging that voice. Go, okay, buddy, I hear you. Yeah, we know.
So you'll actually say it in your head, or you'll say something out loud. Because I have a friend.
Say it out loud until you believe it. You know, you're gonna be okay. You're gonna be okay.
I have a friend who's done a bunch of psychedelic experiences, Dave, and he's also done combo, which is for anyone listening, where you burn the frog poison onto your skin, and it's kind of like this purging. And his mantra is, I took the medicine and the medicine is working. And he says that works wonders for him. So that's always been something I've kept in the back of my mind for an experience like that, where I'm just like, I took the medicine is working. And then paying attention to your breath too, I'd imagine would help bring things into a more natural state.
Well, breath is really the warrior way, and the nasal breathing in particular, because the nasal breathing, you start to go into fight or flight. That mindset starts to run. So the anxiety attack starts to take you over. And I've had anxiety attacks since I was 18. And the anxiety attack starts to take over. And then you get into this rapid mouth breathing. And so bringing it back into nasal breathing shuts off the fight or flight response and gets you back into your prefrontal cortex, into your executive functioning. So at least now you can start to come at your anxiety from a rational viewpoint. So that's the first step, getting into the nasal breathing. And there's all kinds of good stuff happening when you do your nasal breathing. You start to produce nitric oxide, which is great for anti-anxiety. And so that's the first thing. The other thing I will say, man, is if the dark shit starts to come up and it starts to take hold of you, the worst thing you can do is try to resist it and push it away. The best thing you can do, because the more you push it and resist it and try and get rid of it, the stronger it's going to come onto you. So it's the faster you can snap into allowing it. Because a lot of our life, Zach, we spend disallowing ourselves the feelings that we're having. We don't allow ourselves to experience anything. Oh, I'm feeling sad. Let me do this. Oh, I'm feeling bored. Let me go over here. Let me scroll through Instagram. Let me jack off. Let me go do that thing. No,
let me scroll through Instagram while I jack off. Fuck it.
Yeah, exactly. let me fucking
let me do all three at once.
Exactly. Fuck that. Feel the boredom, feel the sadness, feel the anger, feel it right here, right now, in this moment. Allow it. Don't let it take you over. Can you feel the emotions and not be the emotions? Because we get wrapped up, and that's part of the identification with our ego, and just the identifying process in general. We want to really attach ourselves to this experience we're having. But the truth of the matter is, if you just allow it and watch it, when you see someone being angry, you're sitting across from a person, you find yourself somewhere, and someone's having some sort of big experience of sadness, of anger, of outrage, whatever it might be, do you go over there and you tell them, hey man, fucking stop, snap out of it?
Yeah.
What are you doing? No, you don't.
Yeah.
You just watch it. So why then, when you're feeling shit, do you start going, hey brother, fucking stop doing that?
Yeah. Yeah, for me, when I've had anxiety and it leads into a panic attack, the most effective way that if there's someone else there with me, when they start saying, you know, like stop being anxious or stop being anxious, when they mention the thing, it gets worse. But it's someone that just kind of talks to me like I'm not freaking out. And same thing when I'm with someone else that's having anxiety, where they're just like, I can't be here right now. I try to talk to them and just act like it's not, like everything's fine, like everything's okay. It's almost like it's some sort of anxiety martial arts where just letting it sink into you and being willing to feel it makes it dissipate. It does not make sense at all, but it works. Like it works. I know from people that I've been there with anxiety attacks that I've been talking to them or going through experiences with them, and same thing for me where people have been with me. I'm just like, I don't know why I'm feeling calm right now. You know, this is you're one of my wilder friends, and I consider myself wild at times too, but like this person is a calming energy to me right now because they're just being themselves, and you know, it's almost like they don't give a fuck that I'm freaking out.
Absolutely, dude. Another thing with the anxiety is you start to disassociate from yourself and from your physical body, which can be really scary, which is why I believe that everything we feel, there's negative and positive to it. It's yin and yang. There's darkness and light. So anxiety, dude, is really a fucking superpower because you're super sensitive to the energies moving through you. And that can be really scary if you don't have, you know, think about it, man. If you just jumped on a rocket ship and blasted off into outer space with no training, you'd be fucking freaking out. I mean, they're talking about taking people up into space on these fucking rockets. I'm like, who the fuck wants to do that? You just want to board a rocket ship and go up to the moon for what? We got plenty to do down here on Earth. And without training, you think you're just going to go up into outer space where there's literally nothing there. There's no atmosphere. There's nothingness. And you're just going to be cool with that? It doesn't work that way. Because your mind, your soul, your spirit, you have to integrate all of this information. And if there's no learning that and no context that is the foundation for the experience you're about to have, like if you just went and smoked the toad, 5-MeO DMT, and never knew what it was, you might not ever come back.
Yeah, you know? Like you need to have some sort of reason or something grounding you, some mission for better living, or just a better understanding of yourself. Intention, yeah. That was the word I was looking for.
So anxiety, look, I don't know when anxiety became a big part of your life. For me, it was 18, and the first time I did it, it was like I got shot into the fucking stratosphere. And I didn't know, I felt like I lost all touch with reality. I lost complete, and it was out of nowhere.
Yeah, that's around when it started for me. I was about 19. I think I was a sophomore in college, and I'd smoked weed a bunch of times. I love weed. I love smoking. It's more something that I see it as something that reveals things that I need to work on. So I have no problem with weed at all. I think it's been very beneficial in my life and has revealed some things. But before I had that perspective where I was just kind of like smoking it to smoke it and hang out, and I didn't really have any respect for the drug, I'd smoked a bunch of times and have gotten super high and had never, like, not even a drop of anxiety. I was just like, I could go to outer space and come back and nothing ever goes wrong on this. And then,
Right.
And then one day I just remember kind of like what you were describing, just dissociating from everyone sitting in my living room in college in the baseball house where everyone's having a conversation. And I felt like I was behind a glass wall. And everyone, like, I was like evaporating and I silently freaking out. And it was one of the scariest moments of my life that I ended up getting through. But that was kind of when it started for me, where I woke up and I was like, all right, you know, this is a powerful thing. And if you don't respect it, it's going to take you places that you may not be ready for. And so after that, I always knew, like, all right, part of smoking weed is that something on the menu may be a challenging experience for me. I shouldn't smoke and get super high if I'm not ready to possibly encounter a very challenging experience, or maybe a little bit challenging, but something on that spectrum is certainly possible. And after that, I felt that resonate with me more deeply, and I had a greater respect for it.
Totally, man. I've been there. Exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, and the space thing, because you mentioned kind of like astronauts and launching into space, and I was lucky enough to record a podcast a couple days ago with Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian. And so I was doing a bunch of research for his new book that he has coming out, Project Hail Mary. And in that research, I learned a lot about what is important for astronauts. Is it skills? Is it psychology? What are the things that NASA and other companies look for when they're putting a bunch of people on a ship for, you know, maybe almost a decade, depending on where we want to go. And it's all about the psychology. A lot of it has to do with the psychology of astronauts, because the worst thing that could possibly happen is you have a crew of 5 people and one of them goes into a super paranoid state and tries to, like, kill another astronaut, or that's an extreme example and a very general example, but I was like, wow, I didn't even think of that. You have to think about, okay, what are the psychologies of the people that I'm going to put together on this little silver bullet, this small submarine in space for 5 years, 10 years, however long a mission lasts.
Those dudes, those people have to be fucking ice cold, man. You've got to be stone cold mentally with an ironclad mindset. I couldn't do it. I'd freak the fuck out. I don't know what would happen. Like, it's too much. I'm too high as it is. Like, all the meditating and shit that I do and the breathing practices that I do, all of that, I'm already so far out into outer space that if you put me out there, I have no interest in that. Like, I have literally no interest in that. And that was something that really occurred to me. As I've for whatever reason, I can't even remember why I started thinking about that, about astronauts in particular, maybe watching some movie. I don't remember what, but I had that exact realization. I said, oh, to be an astronaut, you have to be so even keeled. Like, beyond anything, that is the most important thing. You have to be completely stone cold mentally.
Yeah. Well, something I wanted to get into, which you could argue requires a lot of maybe some coldness mentally, or being even keeled, is you hosted a podcast with Mike Tyson, Hotboxin. And before we get into any of that, I just want to share my appreciation for your role on that podcast. I viewed you as the glue who held together that podcast, even though it was called Hotboxin with Mike Tyson. The way that you facilitated the conversation I was just listening to an episode with Mike Tyson, you, and Joey Diaz, and I'm like, here are two guys that are just absolute fucking, like, they've been to the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, and this conversation could go completely off the rails. And the way that you were taking these two guys, which are characters, like Joey Diaz and Mike Tyson, I've never met either of them, but they seem like, you know, they're these two forceful juggernaut characters, and the way that you were able to navigate that so soulfully and kind of like a jiu-jitsu where we were talking about before, that I am, as a podcaster and someone who's recorded about 150, 160 conversations now, I listened to Hotboxin and I was like, wow, Eben is super skilled. He's such a good facilitator. It's a shame what happened with everything that we don't have to get into, but just, last I heard when you released the video on YouTube, you were no longer associated, it sounded like, with Hotboxin. But before I asked you some questions on that, I just wanted to make clear that it's coming from a place of love, because I listened to a bunch of episodes when I first discovered it, and I really appreciated what you did on that show.
I really appreciate that, Zach. I really appreciate you saying that. I mean, that, it was an incredible experience doing that, creating that show with Mike, and that was a psychedelic experience in itself.
Yeah.
You know, coming in every day, and here I am with one of the most controversial athletes in the history of sports. Hate him or love him. You know, some people still hail him as the greatest heavyweight champion of all time. Other people are honest, you know, other people are like, he's a fucking rapist. He should be behind bars. And it's just like, okay, it's a really interesting experience to spend time with a person like that, who I found to be incredibly heartfelt, humble, had a really deep soul connection with Mike. And it was, for me, a constant process of coming back to, how do I best serve this environment? Because my ego would constantly come in and go, Eb, you should have your own fucking thing. Eb, you gotta fucking, you know, Eb, you should speak more. Eb, you should, you know, and it would constantly be like, you know what? My job here is to make Mike feel comfortable enough to open himself up to share the way he did, you know. And I think that was really the value that I brought, was I made Mike feel really comfortable and safe and able to share the way he did. And that's why the show was so good and what it was. That episode in particular, Joey Diaz, that was one of my all-time favorites. I mean, two wild men, you know, complete wild tigers, just unchained in the room, talking about all kinds of funny, hysterical stuff. And that was a lot of fun. I mean, you know, here we are. I don't know what it is now. I'm no longer there. I've had a couple conversations with the new producer, who I actually like, because they brought in Mike's business partners on his cannabis stuff. Mm-hmm. During COVID, at some point, I don't know what the deal was. I guess they weren't happy with what it was doing. They wanted it to be something else, and they didn't get me. It seems, at the end of the day, looking back on it, they never really understood me and my position, and I think they were even, to some extent, a little bit afraid of my connection with Mike. So they went and found a new production company, and they hired a new team, and I had conversations with them about coming back and co-hosting. Apparently they didn't tell me this at the time, but they had this idea of doing a rotating co-host situation, which I'm not really interested in at all. Mm-hmm. I had some good conversations with the new head of the new production team, And he really stressed how much he wanted me there. And I appreciated that. But at the end of the day, man, it was just like, you know what? I went there and actually recorded a podcast with Jake Paul at the new set. And I was just thinking to myself, you know, I think I'm done here. I think I've done my work in this space, and it's time for me to go move on. That's not always easy, but for me, my life has always been about following where the universe takes me. And in my body, it didn't feel right anymore. Being in that place, you know, I felt at one point I really loved it, and I felt really connected to it. And I found myself sitting in the chair looking across at Mike, who I loved to death, who had given me a big hug. You know, it was great to see him after a long time apart. And I just thought to myself, you know, I'm just not meant to be here anymore. Yeah. It's time for me to move on and do my own thing.
Yeah, that was a kind of a wake-up call, and maybe even a future lesson for myself about the disconnection between the corporation or the business minds behind a product or a piece of art and the actual product or piece of art itself. Because the first thing I paid attention to, I was like, all right, I wonder what other people are saying about this, because, you know, I loved you on there. I was disappointed when I turned on the first episode, and I was like, that's not Eben. What's going on here? And people in the comments were saying similar things, like not really malicious, like what, you know, this show sucks now, but it's more like, yeah, I really appreciated Eben's presence on Apple Podcasts, YouTube comments. And I'm like, do the people that make this show, like the investors or not make the show, because you make the show, but like the people that are the business heads, like the big money behind it, do they not read or watch the episodes? Do they not know what's going on? Because if they even watched a half of an episode, they would know, okay, this guy is a good idea. This guy should, you know, this is a great product. It's a great conversation, and it's a thing that people enjoy.
Well, it's really interesting, man. The whole show was about deconstructing the ego, and at the end of the day, the realization was Mike is surrounded by a lot of people who are stuck in their ego and have all kinds of ideas about what it should be and what it should look like and what's good and what's interesting. And no, I mean, for the most part, I don't think they spent a lot of time watching the show. I don't think they really, because we created something that was extremely culturally significant. To create a show, because anybody can really throw together a podcast with a historical icon like that. And it could be entertaining, and it could be sort of a celebrity talk show, because everybody wants to come and talk with Mike. So it was really interesting to have that access. I mean, you know, man, I got to hang out with everybody from Tony Robbins and Snoop Dogg to LL Cool J and fucking Joey Diaz, like legendary humans. And that was amazing. But the difference with this show and why people fell so much in love with it, which I don't think the people surrounding, sort of from the business side, understood, was that this is profound to have a guy like Mike Tyson speaking about these issues, whether it was masculinity and sexuality or his shame and guilt about things he had done in his life and things he had experienced and the darkness and death and all of that. It made something that was really special. And I don't think they really understood what that was, you know, for better or worse. They didn't get it. And they had their own ideas about what it was supposed to be. You know, the other thing I will say, I had one more thing I wanted to say about that. I forget, but that was about, you know, that's about it. They don't really understand it, and they have a whole idea about what it is and what they want it to be, and you know, that's kind of how it went.
Yeah, I heard you say once that Mike takes us out to Venus, and my job is to kind of like reel us back into Earth, reel us back to reality a little bit. And as a big fan of the show, and also someone who wants to get better and better at podcasting, is there a time where you felt like you were particularly stuck on Venus, that you had to sort of assert your presence or kind of reel things back in, that stands out, like a moment on the podcast that could have went sideways and then you were able to bring things back to Earth? Anything that stands out with a particular guest or particular moment?
Well, one of the most significant moments in that realm, and it was pretty dark. I mean, it was one of the things I had to do with that show is release all expectations of anything. You know, we'd have a guest come in. I came up with all the questions and the narrative of like, what are we trying to get at here? That was the undercurrent of allowing Mike and this person to do their thing and allowing Mike to riff wherever it made sense. And it was fun when Mike had a relationship with the person, a previous relationship with the person. Sometimes we'd come in, Mike would have no idea who we were talking to. Like the Joey Diaz one was funny in particular because Mike had no idea who Joey Diaz was. Yeah,
I feel like that almost makes it better in some ways.
Yeah.
Because if you're doing the research to set Mike up, kind of set the stage, and Mike has no idea, it's almost like who knows what's going to happen, and then things play out. But yeah,
exactly. So I'd have in my head, you know, and it wasn't a ton. I mean, depending on who the person was and how interested I was in them. And I'll be honest, I mean, sometimes we had guests and I could have cared less about anything they really had to contribute, but that would just make kind of the pre-production a little more involved, of trying to just make sure I hit certain topics or whatever it was. And that was really the essence of the bringing it back from Venus. It would go way, way the fuck out, way out, way out. Mike would take us so far out into something. And then it would just be like, because one of the things that I thought was always so good is Mike would say something totally outlandish, and then I would bring it down to earth and say, Mike, how do you feel about that? I mean, you just said this, X, Y, and Z. What does that make you feel like inside? You know, and I bring it right down into the heart. Yeah. And then this person would be like, whoa, and that would give Mike an opportunity to kind of expand on the psychedelic intergalactic trip that he was on. But one time in particular, which I feel like was maybe the most important moment of the entire thing, was we had Chris Cyborg in there, the legendary female MMA fighter. And Mike had come off a handful of 5-MeO DMT experiences that had really rocked his world, and he was sort of on the edge of maybe it had been too much what he had seen and experienced, and he felt full of shame, and he felt like he wasn't good enough to be alive, you know. And I let him do his thing, and it was so, I was in tears. I was so moved by it. Like, I was heartbroken listening to this guy say this. And I just had to bring it back, and I said to him, you know, Mike, you had to go through all of that stuff so that you could change the world and talk about it. Because you have no idea how many people's lives you're changing, even saving, by being able to express these things. You know, so that was one moment where, and that episode ended, and I had to fucking take a long walk outside because I felt so, and that was a lot of it, man. You know, I'm a deep empath, and I feel energy heavily. And with Mike, it was a constant process of making sure I was doing what I needed to do to get myself clean and clear of, because it would just be this soul blasting of karma and energy happening in the room.
Yeah.
And I would have to do all sorts of things to make sure I got myself clean and to make sure that I was coming into every episode clear and free of whatever energy had been dispersed throughout the last session. So that's really what that experience was like. I mean, if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you always been able to pick up on energy like that, whether it was hosting a podcast with Mike or playing football as a kid? Were you always able to feel energy in that way as an empath?
Yes, it's always been one of my superpowers. I grew up in a family that was heavily affected by alcoholism. And when you live in an alcoholic household, there's a lot of chaos and a lot of heavy energy, a lot of dark energy. And so one of my superpowers becoming really sensitive to the energy of the room, to the energy of other people, to see where everybody's at, so that I could either keep myself safe or be prepared, or keep my brother safe, or to be prepared to move and shift and be whatever I needed to be in that situation to bring peace to the environment. And that served me well, and it served me really well throughout my life. I will say that, it's a practice to keep that in check, because that can sort of get dysfunctional as well. All of these things, like I said, there's positive and negative effects to all of it. So the negative effect of that can be that I get really small and I get really quiet and I don't speak my truth and I allow people to walk all over me. But the positive of that is I can really gauge where people are at, and I know through the energy and fucking, I don't know, I mean, if you believe in quantum physics, which seems to be proven more and more every single day, everything is interconnected, man. The particles in the air are affecting the particles of your being in a certain way, and frequencies and vibrations and all of that stuff. And if you can quiet yourself down to a point where you can feel that and understand it, you can really gauge where human beings are at and the things, the body language, the energy they're giving off, and without them saying a word. I'll give you another example of during my NFL career, my last year in Jacksonville. I had 3 years of fucking injuries every year, working my ass off to get back. Finally, I'm in my 4th year in Jacksonville, last year of my contract. I'm coming off a herniated disc that I had surgery on that got infected after the surgery. I had to miss the second half of my 3rd season because I needed 8 weeks of intravenous antibiotics to get this infection out of my disc. Worked my ass off, came back, but the team had been sold. My head coach, Jack Del Rio, had been fired. They had a new head coach in there. Worked my ass off. I'm starting at left guard again, going into my last year. First game of the season, a dude gets thrown into my left ankle, completely rolls it. I've got a low high ankle sprain, which the second opinion doctor that I went to through my agent said, if this was any higher, you'd need surgery, but this is going to be a 6 to 8 week recovery. My trainers and our team doctors were saying 2 to 3 weeks, you'll be back.
So the outside opinion was saying 6 to 8, and the team doctors were saying 2 to 3.
Yes. And the head coach was on my ass for whatever reason. We just did not vibe. Mike Malarkey. His name speaks volumes about who he is. And
that's great.
And we clashed from day one for whatever reason. I don't know what it was. he clearly had some insecurities about himself, and that's kind of another thing. And and it was all good because it was an incredible learning experience for me. But I worked my ass off. I come back too early. I'm in practice 2 weeks out from the surgery, and they're saying, Eb, or 2 weeks out from the injury, and they're like, Eb, you're going to be fine. I'm like, guys, I can't push off my left foot. I'm playing left guard. I can't move to my right. It's going to be fine. We'll tape it up. We'll give you the pills. It'll be fine. Okay. I'm doing what's best for the team because I'm the fucking team guy. You know, this is my family. These are my brothers. I'm here for all this. Okay. Go up. I'm playing against the Cincinnati Bengals, one of the all-pro D-tackle, Geno Atkins, and I just get my fucking ass kicked. They bench me at halftime, which totally destroyed me. At halftime, the head coach says to me, Eb, yeah, you clearly weren't ready yet. We need you to just rest up, and we need to get you back healthy. I'm like, okay. After the game, he goes and says that the left guard spot is up for grabs and that they benched me because I wasn't playing well.
So he told you that you needed a break and was giving off vibes that we want what's best for you, and then he tells the media that they might go in a different direction at left guard, that's fucked.
Yeah. So I'm like, all right, bitch. So the next week I come back, work my ass off, earn the starting spot, have a good game. The next week we're playing the Raiders. The team is going to shit. We're like 1-5 now. And apparently I was one of the guys that they decided was the reason for why we were losing. So after week 6, it was like that game against the Raiders. They bench me. They start this other guy. And I just totally checked out. But the really incredible experience of all of that was seeing this, because I went from being a team captain, the golden child, as many of the coaches and my teammates would say. They'd say, Eb, you can do no wrong, man. You're the golden child.
You're that source of energy.
Yeah, I was always that guy. And then all of a sudden, here I am, I get benched, and no one can even look me in the eye and tell me what's going on. My O-line coach, who actually had stayed from the previous coaching staff, who I loved, he can't even tell me what's happening, what they're doing. No one can be honest with me. And it was an incredible experience of like, oh, wow. The energy here is completely different. These people who I thought were my family, the coaches who I looked at as father figures, they could really give a fuck about me when it comes to the business of this game. And look at this shift, the dichotomy of energy, and how it could go from can do no wrong, everyone looks me in the eye, has a smile when they see me, to literally the complete opposite. Can't make eye contact. There's a darkness to them. They're silent in the face of my curiosity. So that was a really interesting experience when it comes to business. And I had that experience, interestingly enough, with Tyson as well. You know, it was never with Mike. Mike and I always had an incredible connection, but I could sense that there was something off with the people around there when they stopped being able to look me in the eye. And there was no, just to cap that off, and for the sake of this conversation, there was never a moment of like, Eb, we're going to go a different direction. It was just like silence, And then when I try to start, they asked me to come back. And I say, okay, let's figure out, I'd love to, negotiate a working agreement and figure out what I'm getting paid and how much of this podcast I own, because I'm one of the 3 guys that started it. Let's figure it out. And then that just, meeting resistance, meeting with, just kind of nonsense. And misdirection and, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that, we'll give you this. And I'm like, what? I don't get it. Okay, cool. So you clearly don't want me around. That's fine.
What you were describing with football and at Jacksonville with the tension between maybe some of the players and the coaches, front office, that whole dynamic made me think about the hotboxing situation where you have the guys at the top level that may not be connected to what's going on with what's actually in the studio or what's going on the field. And I have no idea what that's like on the NFL stage. That's fucking absurd. That is the elite of the elite. I do have experience though as sort of mid-level college baseball down in Virginia, and even at that level you can sense if there's something off between the coaches and the players. There's this whole energy in the ecosystem.
Absolutely.
And the best coaches are the ones that realize that a big part of their job is to cultivate that energy and that force of people wanting to work together and people falling into their roles and flowing with shit and kind of suppressing your own ego in a way as a coach for the benefit of the players and for the benefit of the team energy. And it's really rare. I've had a few coaches
rare, dude.
I've had a few coaches where I've vibed with, and I'm not innocent either. Like I had a fucking huge ego as a college baseball player, and I'm always going to be battling that too. But when a coach kind of takes the initiative and is a source of that energy that you facilitated so well on the podcast, and it sounds like also in the NFL, it makes everything flow so smoothly where people, they may not agree with what's happening, but at least they have a reason, or at least there's something there that people can grasp onto. There's no sort of like dark mystery to what's going on. It's like, this is the reason. Like, I'm not pitching on Saturday anymore because I sucked 3 starts in a row and this other guy's better than me, or I'm, whatever it is. At least I have a reason for it, and there's not some sort of energy pushing me away. And so, yeah, when you were talking about that, it reminded me of college baseball a little bit and that whole player-coach dynamic.
Zach, you said so much good stuff in there, man. I mean, first of all, the coaching thing is a complete ego trip for most of those guys, especially the guys who have never played before. And then a lot of football players in particular, and athletes in general, it's very difficult to put down the athlete identity and to move on from that. So guys just get stuck in that, especially. What's really interesting is especially the guys who make it to the professional level, because your whole life now, every relationship you have becomes about your identity as this person, as this superstar. So that's really difficult for guys to put down. The other thing you said, which I think is so brilliant, is all we want, whether you're an athlete or anybody, fucking guy working at a desk job or, whatever it is, a janitor, anything, no matter what relationship you're functioning in or through, all any of us want is honesty, man.
Yeah.
Because we have this thing in us that knows exactly when someone's being untruthful or inauthentic. We know it. We might not know what it is, and people can say and lie all sorts of things. But when that happens, when the vibration doesn't add up, doesn't synergize with the words that are being expressed to you, there's this disruption and this distrust that gets created. And like you said, it's a darkness, it's a mystery, it's something that we're trying to figure it out, and we're left like wandering in the dark, trying to understand what the fuck is going on, what's wrong here. Yeah. And all we really want at the end of the day, man, is honesty through and through,
One thing I wanted to make sure that we get into is, so as a podcast host, I've been trying to draw through lines through the lives of my guests, doing research and trying to figure out how everything is connected, because I think that's fun. It's exciting for me, and it's also made for some good conversation. And so for you, I started taking notes in 3 columns, and I'll fit things into each of those columns as I'm kind of going along in the research. So I had psychedelics and ego, football, and podcasting, content creation. And so those 3 pillars, I was kind of placing things in my research, and I was trying to figure out, like, what is the through line between podcasting, psychedelics, and letting go, and the art of the ego and handling the ego, and also football. And the first thing that popped into my head is the warrior ethos. Being a warrior, you need to have some aspect of approaching those 3 elements with a warrior mentality. When you go onto the football field, something I've never done at at anything above pickup games, but you obviously need to have a warrior mentality, especially as an O lineman, where you're literally in the trenches going against 300-pound guys that are trying to fucking manhandle you, and you still got a job to do. And then with podcasting, you have to have some sort of that warrior aspect where you don't know what's going to happen in a conversation. You are willing to put yourself in that situation, and you're just like, fuck it, let's press record and see what happens. And then with psychedelics and ego, obviously, with what you described, you need that sort of warrior mentality to get through it. And so that is my that's my through line that I saw for you, and that's based off listening to you as a podcaster. I've watched videos of you on other podcasts as well, and so I wanted to see what your response to that would be. How do you see? Would you agree with some of those through lines, and how do you kind of see, if you do agree, that those are connected?
I think you hit it on the fucking head, bro. You hit the nail on the head. The warrior ethos, breaking that down, what is that really about? And to me, at one time in my life, I would have told you it was one thing. And at another time in my life, I would have told you it was something else. And now, today, I might tell you it's a third thing. But to me, the warrior ethos, so at one time, the warrior ethos is about, you're a warrior, you're war driven. Your life is about the war, the battle, the fight. So a lot of that is about picking up the sword and the shield and going into battle. And that was my football life. And everything I did, how I carried myself, I was living by the warrior code. Everything I did from the time I was 13 years old, basically all the way through to the end of my NFL career, was all about living as in this persona of the warrior, what I thought was the warrior, the gladiator, we'll call it. But then I realized that there was another aspect of the warrior ethos that I hadn't really been paying attention to, which was living from the truth of your soul and doing that with courage. And that's maybe the most difficult thing. And to me, that's really, at the end of the day, what the warrior code is all about. It's living in your truth, as difficult as that can be, especially in this day and age. And if you're going to be someone like myself, who I really look at my life as simply being sharing my experiences and my inner world, because I believe that by putting that out into the universe, I'm helping other people who are experiencing similar things get more in touch with themselves or give context to the things they're feeling, like you talking to me about your anxiety, dude. It's super profound because I connected with you on all of that.
Yeah, I felt the same way.
With cannabis, etc. And so to me, the warrior ethos is all about living from the truth of your soul, living as authentic of a life as you possibly can. And the mediums by which I do that are podcasting. And podcasting, you could say, is another very masculine. It's very masculine in that it's going out into the world. So like, you throw the spear. Throwing the spear is a symbol of masculinity. Mm-hmm. The warrior ethos is very rooted in masculine drive, being the hunter, being the protector, being the warrior. So podcasting is like thrusting your metaphysical sword out into the world and seeing what happens. Mm-hmm. Now, all of that being said, one of the most powerful tools in the warrior armory is the power of being willing to surrender. And I had one of my great teachers, one of my mentors in life after football, this guy named Kirk Westwood. I've done some podcasts with him, and he's a shaman. And my first ayahuasca ceremony, I did it with him, and he came out of it and he said, "Eb, I saw myself as an old man, and my older self said to me, Kirk, in the battle for happiness, let surrender be thy sword." And I was like, fuck.
That's fucking profound.
Yeah, and for me, it's like, wow, dude. The more I come to it, the deeper I go into myself, it's all about surrendering. Because I really, I find that I get into trouble when I'm trying to make shit happen. I'm trying to do a lot, and I'm trying to will things. And our will is not really supposed to be activated by the ego. Our will's main purpose is to serve the will of the divine, of the universe. We're supposed to use our will to get us into action to do the bidding of the universe. If you're familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, something that might help connect the dots here is that, Krishna tells Arjuna that we have a right to our work, but we don't have any right to the fruits of our work. And that might sound really sad and depressing, but the truth of the matter is, like, we are all particles of this magnificent being that is the one, that is the universe. And we all have a purpose to fulfill, man. We're all here doing the universe's work. And, I've had enough psychedelic experiences to have had in real time these moments where I go, oh man. And you hear spiritual gurus talk about this. It's like we're not even here. Because when you say you have a message to give to someone, and when you really peel back the layers, your job in transferring that message to another person, or doing work, or building a thing, or doing whatever it is, it's all fulfilling the grand scheme of the universe in this one thing that we're all a part of, and it's really just our ego and our identity that gets all trapped in, what am I getting out of this? How much money am I going to make? What is the thing that, how famous am I going to be after I do this X, Y, and Z? And, man, we're really just here to be in our purpose and be in our truth and carry out the will of the universe.
I love that. You have the rights to your work, not the fruits of your work.
Yeah.
There's a TED Talk that perfectly ties into that you should definitely check out if you haven't listened to it yet. It's by Elizabeth Gilbert, the author of Eat, Pray, Love. And she gives a TED Talk in the aftermath of the Eat, Pray, Love success. This is back in 2009, somewhere around there. And she talks a lot about doing the work of the universe, and your only job is to sit down and do the work. In her case, sit down and write. She knows that for 2-3 hours every day, I'm going to sit at this desk and I'm going to write. Whether the muse visits me or whether the force visits me, that is the work of the universe. That's not her exact wording, but she says it so well. But she's trying to get across the point that sit down in the chair, do the work. If the muse visits you, that's great. If she doesn't, that's okay too. You've done your job. So as long as you sit down there, let the universe work through you, and then whatever happens. And she talks about why so many creatives, the music and writing, end up taking their own life. She thinks a lot of it is because of that expectation of, I've made something great and now I need to keep producing that greatness, and I am the muse. Like, the muse is something I'll always have. And she says that having that separate view of the muse, that it's this force that works through her. I'm the vessel. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to do the act of typing out, and I'm going to let the muse run through me. And if she doesn't come, maybe she's visiting someone else that day. Or if I have a thought and I can't write it down, maybe that thought's going to go into someone else, and that's there. Like, the reason I missed it, or the reason I can't remember it, is because, like, that's someone else's work that was just kind of like passing through me. And it's a really good TED Talk, and I also
love that, dude.
Yeah, I want to be conscious of your time as well, because we're coming up on an hour and a half.
I'll throw on there. Great book, The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
Yeah,
it's all about that. And I'll say this because I've had this conversation with my brother, who's a super talented writer. He's self-published now a number of books. His name is Eben Britton. I've had him on my podcast, the Eben Flow, a lot. He's kind of my roll dog for exploring consciousness in the world and various topics of culture.
Yeah. I listened to you guys exploring breastfeeding last week. That was a fun episode.
Oh my God, dude. Yeah. Well, fucking the world gets weirder, man. The more you pay attention, the weirder it gets. And he said to me, or we've had this conversation where you write a book, you do a thing, and you start to worry about how many people are going to read it or see it, or who's going to buy it, etc. And I always tell him, I'm like, dude, you might have written that book. If it hits one person the way it's supposed to, you did your work for the universe. Like, your work literally might be intended to change one person's life, and then that person goes on to become the next president or save the fucking planet in some other way. It's like, you never know, man, but it's just about doing the work, and fuck the expectations.
Yeah.
Because like I said, if it hits one person the way it's meant to, and you just did it because you were the channel for the universe for that information to come through, that's all that matters, To that point of Elizabeth Gilbert, I think that's right on, man. And that's kind of what I always bring myself back to, is I'm just a channel to receive this shit from the universe, and my job is to keep myself as open and receptive and clear as possible to make sure it comes out where it needs to.
Well, perfect segue, when you're channeling things into the universe, where's the best place for people to receive that channel? Where should they follow you? Because you have the Eben Flow podcast. You mentioned that you have a book in the works. Where's the best place for people to follow you so they can receive the work?
I love that, dude. Check me out on Instagram at EDSBritton. On Twitter is the same. Instagram's my main social media platform. Check out my podcast, The Eben Flow. You can also, if you're down and really interested in more mindset, movement, motivation, check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/EDSBritton. And then you could find all of this stuff on my website, ebenbritton.com.
Perfect. I'm going to link all that in the podcast description as well, so people can go to it.
Awesome, brother.
Thank you, Eben. I really appreciate your time. I'm a huge fan of you, regardless of where the work's coming out, if it's on Hotboxin or the Eben Flow. I really enjoy the work that you do, and I'm going to continue to follow as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
That
Zach.
sounded like Elvis. Thank you very much.
That's good, dude. You were channeling.
Yeah, Elvis's spirit was working through me in that moment. I was the vessel.
I love that.